Joining us now is one of the authors of the Amnesty report, Benjamin Walsby. He's a Middle East researcher in Beirut. Benjamin, thank you very much for joining us. How many civilians exactly were killed by this US-led coalition?
Well, that's a very good question and something to which we may never know the answer. Amnesty's research was focused on revealing the patterns and the problems and the things which were causing so much civilian death and civilian suffering. So we focused upon 4 emblematic cases which told the story of the war against Islamic State in Raqqa and its devastating impact upon civilians. In terms of overall numbers, it could be that we never know how many were killed. I mean, we're saying at least hundreds. Possibly many more than that. It would take a much bigger team of researchers than my colleague and I to comprehensively document every civilian death. And it's one of the reasons why we're urging the coalition to carry out thorough and proper investigations. But at the moment, it's very difficult to say how many. It's impossible to say how many civilians were killed as a result of this operation.
Has Amnesty presented its findings to any of the member states that made up this coalition? Of course, the US says that its strikes were targeted.
Sure. Amnesty wrote to the three main countries which carried out strikes, and that's the US, the UK, and France. We wrote to each of them. We had a response from the UK, not a very satisfactory response. We asked some specific questions about the strikes, which we were concerned about, and then we asked more questions about other strikes the UK had carried out. And yeah, the response isn't very positive. We have a very different idea about what transparency means in an operation like this. The UK government seems to think that by telling us it's killed 1 civilian in 4 years of operations, which is impossible, they've been perfectly transparent. What we're urging them to do is to provide the relevant information post-strike. Nobody's asking for a running commentary. Nobody's asking for information on strikes as they're being carried out. Of course, that can't be done. But once strikes are being carried out and once the battle is over, they could provide us with information about times, locations, explosive weights, and it would give us a better chance to say, if they have followed international humanitarian law perfectly as they believe they have, then they'd have nothing to hide. And yet they're nowhere near being ready to provide that kind of information. One of the reasons why we did this work is to push them for it, because we think the civilians of Raqqa are owed at least that.
You mentioned the tactics used by the coalition, and of course I completely understand that you yourself are not a military expert, but in terms of the deaths you're talking about, in terms of the destruction that we see in the pictures of Raqqa, does Amnesty have any opinion about the military hardware that was used in this fight against Daesh, and does Amnesty possibly think that it was excessive?
I mean, I'm not a military expert, but I am specialised in conflict and conflict research. I mean, Amnesty doesn't provide strategic advice on how to fight wars, of course, but the results of our investigations are fairly clear. We believe that there is a very strong prima facie case that these strikes, the strikes that we covered in the report, violated international humanitarian law. And the reason for that, of course, is the reliance upon such long-range tactics. The coalition fired, and this is by their own admission, 30,000 artillery rounds into Raqqa city. Now, when you think that the vast majority of this artillery was unguided, even guided artillery, the best stuff available, which is very expensive and was hardly used, even that has a margin of error of 10 meters. Now, that's the difference between killing your target and killing civilians. Most of the artillery they were using was unguided, and that has a margin of error of 100 meters. So think about the effect of 30,000 artillery shells on a city full of civilians. And then there's the airstrikes. The coalition loves to talk about the precise nature of its airstrikes. But as we keep saying, airstrikes are only as precise as the information behind them. And when the targeting information was done by SDF, fighters on the ground, with iPads, pointing their fingers onto an application because there was a sniper on the roof a few streets away. And then the coalition are monitoring that with overhead surveillance only for maybe an hour, 90 minutes, and deciding that it was okay to hit. That's not going to show you the civilians hiding in the basement or the back room of the house, because civilians hide in conflict. You and I would hide in conflict as well. And that's the reason why they killed so many civilians with these airstrikes.
Benjamin, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. That's Benjamin Walsby, one of the authors of this Amnesty report.